Hello and welcome to episode number 7 of the Scottish History Podcast. My name is Owen and once again, folks, welcome back. Last week, unfortunately, I missed production of an episode, and unfortunately that was just to do with work commitments. This week, unfortunately, I have a very, very short episode for you, and again, that's just been because of work commitments and family commitments that I've had during the course of the week. So apologies in advance that this is going to be quite short, but it's because again, just of things that have been going on. I promise next week that things will be there'll be a longer episode and much more researched and things for you for next week. So once again, apologies. What I do also want to say, however, is again, thank you to everybody for listening, sharing the podcast, and commenting and sending me emails and things like that. It's very much appreciated, and I'm glad that you're enjoying this podcast. We've had a few great ideas for some future episodes. There's certain things that obviously, this is just a hobby of mine. It's it was a job for a while, but it is just a hobby of mine. So there's quite a lot of in-depth information that obviously I would like to know myself before being able to bring it to yourselves. So there's a few additional subjects in which I want to cover, and I definitely want to cover with you, but obviously more research is needed on my part before I can bring them to you so that they're good enough for you to listen to. In having a look at the statistics for the recent episodes and right the way back to the first episodes, the first episode has now been listened to over 250 times, which is, for where I thought that this podcast was going to start from, is absolutely amazing. I'm just absolutely blown away. So please, once again, folks, keep sharing, keep sending me emails, keep sending me messages, and things like that, just so that it does keep me inspired and it does keep me going. So once again, thank you very, very much. So today's episode I started working on last week, but again ran out of time, so it's going to be very, very short, but it's just a little, I suppose, in a way, a public service announcement in regards to a certain Scottish king that many people may have heard of due to a play that they may have to study in school or college or whatever. And it's the story of Macbeth. Let's just take a second to rid ourselves of Shakespeare's version of events when it comes to Macbeth. The story of Macbeth is nothing like what Shakespeare puts out to us. I liken it usually to the events that Mel Gibson tried to tell us in the film Braveheart. It's just utter nonsense. Macbeth was a very peaceful king, born in 1005, and he lived until he was 52 years old, during which time he was the King of Scots for 17 relatively peaceful years until his murder. It was just the last few years of his reign and of his life that things started taking a turn for the worse. Macbeth was from an area called Murray. Now, Murray is just north of Inverness. I am working on getting a website with maps and pinpoint and things to link in with episodes and things so that people can actually get an idea of the geography. If you're not familiar with the geography of Scotland, then it's always handy to have these things. But Murrayshire is where my ancestors are from as well, so a bit of a kinship there with Macbeth. So Macbeth was from Murray, an area north of the city of Inverness, and he became known as the sub-king of Murray. At that time, Scotland didn't just have one king. It wasn't one kingdom as such. It was many different kingdoms, and this is why Macbeth becomes the sub-king of Murray. In 1031 is when he became sub-king, and this was after his cousin Gilcommon died. After Gilcommon's death, and Macbeth becomes the sub-king of Moray, Macbeth marries Gilcommon's widow, whose name was Princess Grouch, and that's just I think that's a brilliant name. So he's now married to Princess Grouch, and he becomes the stepfather of a young boy called Lulac. In 1040, Duncan I, who was king of Alapa at the time, or Scotland, Alapa is the Gaelic term for Scotland. It's spelled A-L-B-A, but in the Scots Gaelic language it's pronounced Alapa. So as though it was spelled A-L-A-P-A, Alapa. So Duncan I was the king of Alapa, or Scotland as it was known. That's what Scotland was known at the time. And Duncan I laid siege on Moray and was killed by Macbeth's army, and that's when Macbeth became the new king of Alapa. So he became the king of the country of Scotland. And it's from there that Macbeth's reign starts, and for the following 17 years Macbeth's rule was relatively peaceful. But it was in 1054 when Siward, the Earl of Northumbria from England, by the order of Edward the Confessor, invaded Alapa, or invaded Scotland, which was unsuccessful on Siward's or the English's part. On the 15th of August in 1057, Macbeth was challenged at the Battle of Lumfannon by the future King Malcolm III of Scots, and as Malcolm and his troops tried to retreat from the battle, Macbeth was captured and he was killed. He was beheaded. Macbeth was then succeeded by his stepson Lulac, and Lulac then became the first king of Scots of which we have actual details of his coronation. His coronation takes place on the 8th of September 1057 at a place I've mentioned a couple of times already, Scone. But Lulac was only king for a matter of months until, like his stepfather Macbeth, he was caught and murdered. This time murdered by Malcolm, who became the new King Malcolm III. Both Macbeth and Lulac are said to be buried on the holy island of Iona, founded by Saint Columba, who came to Scotland, and he gave us Christianity, and he also gave us the Loch Ness Monster. Iona is said to be the burial place of up to 48 Scottish kings, 8 Norwegian kings, and 4 Irish kings, meaning that there are 60 members of Scottish, Norwegian, or Irish royalty buried on that island. Now, I would like to do a whole episode just on St. Columba, so there'll be furthermore information in regards to St. Columba, Iona. People have asked about talking about the religion, and so St. Columba is quite a big part of that. So is a woman called Margaret, Saint Margaret, who was actually married to King Malcolm III, the man that killed Lulac and was involved in killing Macbeth as well. That I'm yet undecided on as to whether to delve into that. When it comes to religion, I think sometimes it's better just to kind of leave it alone. It does seep into various stories, specifically the Jacobite story, which will probably be our next big story. I would include the Wars of Independence as a big story. The Jacobites we will cover, and it'll probably be the next one that I'll cover in a kind of series of podcasts. And of course the Loch Ness Monster, who knows, we might end up with a little bonus episode in regards to the Loch Ness Monster. But perhaps in the future I might be up at Loch Ness. I have a field recorder. That's what I use to record this podcast on. So I have a field recorder. I can go out. You can listen to the banks of Loch Ness while I tell you some stories about the Loch Ness Monster. And of course, there will be a little bit more in regards to Malcolm III, and most importantly, Queen Margaret, or Saint Margaret, his wife. We'll also kind of maybe go through the saints, patron saint, etc. of Scotland, and in the future, and just kind of roll it all into one. But unfortunately, folks, that's really all I have for you this week. Again, I am trying to keep to this weekly schedule. Sometimes life does get in the way. I hope you understand. I'm really sorry that this is quite a short episode, but I will be back next week with a longer and more thought out episode for you. Thank you once again. Please keep sharing the podcast. The pages, once again, you can find me on Twitter at Scott History Pod, Facebook, facebook.com/Scott History Pod, email scotthistorypod. Everything, just go to Google and type in Scott History Pod, all one word if you want, and that will always throw up my pages. scotthistorypod.libsyn.com. You can now find us on Spotify, Apple. I'm going to cease posting on SoundCloud, however, but continue to post on YouTube. SoundCloud, I'm only getting something like 10 or 15 listens on SoundCloud. Most people tend to use Spotify and Apple Podcasts these days. So once again, thank you very much for listening, and I will see you in the next episode.